really, with MAT, there's only one goal, and that goal is to improve the ability for your muscles to contract. That's it. Now, there are a lot of really cool side effects that can come with that, such as improving joint motion, such as reduction in symptoms and or tightness, such as helping you be better prepared to work out or recover from your workout, helping your body feel more relaxed, decreasing your risk for injury, and improving your strength output. All of those things are really cool side effects that can come from improving the ability for your muscles to contract. But the number one and only goal of MAT is still to figure out where your muscles aren't contracting well and get those muscles contracting better. Welcome to the Exercise is Health podcast, where we're talking about exercise, health, and the interconnectedness of the two. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we will be coming to you every single week from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Exercise is Health podcast. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we're coming to you from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg in Schaumburg, Illinois. Now, at Muscle Activation Schaumburg, we believe your health is your most valuable asset. Your health is one of the biggest influencers of the quality and quantity of time that you have. And while there are many aspects of health, our expertise is exercise. Exercise has been proven time and again to not only improve your health, but also increase your longevity and improve your quality of life. And if you're looking for a way to exercise on your own while still receiving the quality of guidance that we give our clients here at Muscle Activation Schaumburg, then you need to check out our virtual membership program. This is exactly why we designed our virtual membership program, to help people who aren't immediately in our vicinity still exercise with top quality guidance. So if this is of interest to you, head on over to matschaumburg.com and click on the membership tab. Now, this week we are answering your questions, and this one got sent in to us via Facebook Messenger. And the question reads, what's the difference between stretching and MAT? Because I hear you all talking about MAT all the time, but I can't really figure out where to place it relative to stretching. And this is a question that we get a lot, especially when we're talking with new clients, when we're talking with prospective clients, and even some of our more veteran clients that have been around for a little bit still aren't quite sure what the differences are between something that they're more familiar with and that's more common, such as stretching, and what we do here at Muscle Activation Schaumburg, which is Muscle Activation Techniques.
You know, this is often confused because whenever we are inquiring about any kind of modality, whether it's stretching or massage or acupuncture or muscle activation techniques, we always want to know the result, right? Like what is the result of doing that? And oftentimes different modalities can lead to similar results, or at least practitioners have seen it lead to some kind of a similar result. Or in our mind, it logically leads us down the path that it should lead us to this similar result. And I think that's why a lot of times muscle activation techniques get clumped into all these other different categories, because what individuals believe are getting them certain results, they believe MAT might be getting them the same results. So it gets really confusing. It's like, well, you move the body around and you know, you get X, Y, and Z result, which we'll start talking about in a moment. And also that seems to be what I get when I do stretching or when I get a massage or when I get acupuncture. But actually, MAT is very unique relative to other modalities. Today we're going to be comparing it, actually contrasting it to stretching. And once we get into this conversation, I think you guys will understand and be able to see a bit better what the differences are between stretching and MAT.
So let's start off with what some of the goals of stretching might be. Now, we don't stretch our clients here at Muscle Activation Schaumburg, but at least for myself personally, I definitely came from a world where I would stretch my clients. At the end of every session, I'd spend the last 10 minutes of the session kind of stretching out my clients. And I used to stretch out myself every single day. And so coming from that background and that history, we're going to talk about some of the goals that are typically associated with stretching. And the first one that I think comes to mind for most people is kind of improving flexibility or improving joint motion, okay? Improving how much your joints can move. This tends to be a big goal for people who are trying to stretch. It's like, oh, I'm inflexible, so I need to stretch. Like, how many times have you thought that? How many times have you heard that? How many times have you read that online? Oh, your hips aren't moving as well as you would like? Well, you need to be doing these stretches to try to help with that. And that's what we're told day in and day out. And so that tends to be a big one for stretching, is this improvement in joint motion or this increasing your flexibility.
You know, the flexibility one is so big, and this one for some reason is referred to as directly correlated, meaning as you lose flexibility, it's probably because you weren't stretching enough. And for some reason, that becomes like the blanket statement or like the catch-all for like if you're losing flexibility. And in our practice, we often see this, especially as people are aging. Often we hear our clients tell us like, oh, I know I need to be stretching because I'm losing flexibility. And what Charlie and I often see is that not only are they not stretching, but they're also not doing much to maintenance their muscles at all. Like they're not doing their weight training, and specifically the type of weight training that we talk about on this podcast all the time, meaning using your full range, activating your muscle tissue, being focused internally. And so it's interesting, how would people know specifically if the lack of flexibility is coming from, you know, stretching or lack of using your muscles all the time? So it is an interesting one that stretching is always, you know, one of the goals of stretching is usually to influence flexibility, although there could be many things that influence flexibility, but that's definitely a big one.
Another goal that we often hear people bring up is wanting to reduce a specific symptom or some kind of tightness that they're experiencing in their muscles. Oh, my hamstrings are so tight. Oh, my hip flexors are so tight. Or they'll get really specific. Oh, my piriformis is so tight. Oh, my psoas is so tight. And so I need to stretch that. And that is something that we hear a lot, and that's because a lot of people are told that. And so that ends up being one of the predominant goals of stretching as well. It's like, oh, I have this symptom, I have this tightness, I want to reduce it, and so I'm going to stretch that symptom. I'm going to try to stretch out that tightness in order to get rid of it.
The next one is blood flow. We hear this one a lot too, where just getting stretches in a certain area will help improve blood flow to a certain area, which can help potentially, I guess, with muscle function there or making that area feel different. That can be lumped in with that sensation one. But also it can lead to our next point, which is, you know, preparation for exercise and recovery from exercise. You'll often see individuals and or athletes stretching before or after they are exercising or working out or in their sport or whatever as a means to prepare for exercise, get their body ready to exercise, and also to recover post-exercise. I know that, as Charlie mentioned, how he used to, you know, stretch his clients after working out. I remember in college always stretching for 15 minutes after I exercised because I was always told that stretching helped you recover. So I thought if I stretched, then I wouldn't have as much recovery to do in terms of soreness and achiness following my exercise.
No, I was right there with you. I mean, I used to, after every single practice through high school and college, after every single workout, whether it's lifting or plyometric base or more conditioning, I mean, I would spend 15 to 20 minutes at least, you know, doing stretches to try to, like you're saying, help my recovery, try to reduce my soreness. And sometimes if I really felt up for it, I would stretch for like 45 minutes after because I thought, well, you know, if a little must be good, more must be better. And so then I'm going to be really recovered after doing this. And I'm going to have, you know, way less soreness than I otherwise would. I'm going to be way more prepared than I otherwise would. And so that was kind of what I always believed. And anecdotally, that's the story I would kind of, that my experience led me to believe as well, meaning, oh, if I did a new workout and I forgot to stretch after and I noticed soreness, in my head, it was because I didn't stretch. And then the next time I did that workout, I made sure to stretch, and then I'd be like, oh, well, I'm less sore. So that must mean that the stretching made me less sore. So stretching must prevent soreness. Like that was my line of thought. And it's like, or maybe that's another time doing the workout, so your body's a little bit more used to it. Maybe, how'd you sleep? How is your nutrition? What other, how many other variables are potentially involved in why you do or don't feel sore? And for me, it was just all about, well, I didn't stretch, so I'm sore, so that must be why I'm sore is because I didn't stretch, or I'm not as sore and I did stretch, so that must be why. So that was always the story I told myself. And to be honest, like now I never stretch, like ever, and I work out really hard, and I'm rarely am I ever sore, even when I do brand new workouts, even when I do super intense workouts. So that line of reasoning doesn't really seem to hold up, at least now in my experience, even though that was a story I told myself for years.
And, the last one of the big goals of stretching that we hear a lot is for relaxation and for meditative things. Like when people do a yoga class, there's a lot of stretching involved in yoga, and that is used for, again, relaxation of the body or the mind, and for potential meditative poses that may include stretching.
And just one more thing that I want to add to that list of goals that kind of goes with the preparation for workouts is this idea of wanting to reduce injuries. That was something that I was told early on, is that, hey, if you want to make sure that you don't get injured, you want to stretch, and really you want to stretch before you work out. So you're all good and loose and ready to move and ready to work out, ready to play, ready to compete. And so this kind of injury reduction is another line of reasoning as far as why people choose to stretch specifically before they work out, to make sure that their body's all good to go. So that kind of bleeds into the preparation from your workout that you talked about in the last point too.
And I do want to highlight, we're talking about goals, and we're about to jump into the goal of MAT, and we have been talking about the goals of stretching, right? And what's interesting with stretching, and I would have never thought of this until I was exposed to MAT, but with stretching, it's very difficult to know if you have accomplished that goal. Right? I mean, maybe the symptom reduction one, you can kind of tell because you feel one way before stretching and then you feel a different way after stretching. But for example, like flexibility, that would be really difficult to be able to objectively track changes because there's so many things going on as you're stretching in terms of how it feels. A lot of times flexibility might not even be change in motion. It might be just change in sensation, but the same motion. So that one's difficult to track. Injury prevention is pretty hard to track. Just with everything that is talked about with preventative care, it's hard to know what you're preventing because it hasn't happened yet. Or workout recovery, just like what Charlie brought up, because there's so many variables, it's very difficult to know, was stretching a participant in helping you recover, or did it produce more stuff for you to recover from later? We don't know. It's very difficult to track relative to the types of goals that people have for stretching, including, meditative and or relaxation type things. It's very difficult. Like, was I as relaxed because I was stretching while I did that? Or could I just sit there in not a stretch and get just as relaxed? So I share this not to invalidate all the goals of stretching, but just to acknowledge how the goals of stretching are. Because of the nature of stretching, it is just very, very difficult to track and objectively measure the outcomes and the changes that people get with stretching. And I think that's, as Charlie and I were working through these, like we were sharing tidbits of our experience with stretching and experience our clients have had with stretching. And a lot of it tends to be like, yeah, I think I felt better, or I think I got more motion, and it's not that they didn't get better or they didn't get more motion, but it's just the trackability is very difficult.
Okay, cool. So let's jump into the goal, and I'm purposely making that singular, of muscle activation techniques, because really with MAT, there's only one goal, and that goal is to improve the ability for your muscles to contract. That's it. Now, there are a lot of really cool side effects that can come with that, such as improving joint motion, such as reduction in symptoms and or tightness, such as helping you be better prepared to work out or recover from your workout. helping your body feel more relaxed, decreasing your risk for injury, and improving your strength output. All of those things are really cool side effects that can come from improving the ability for your muscles to contract. But the number one and only goal of MAT is still to figure out where your muscles aren't contracting well and get those muscles contracting better. That's it. And everything else that you hear about MAT is just an awesome, I shouldn't say just, but it's an awesome side effect that comes from getting muscles contracting better.
Yeah, the difficult thing with MAT in terms of explaining it to people, and that's one of the big reasons we started this podcast, and that's why this question comes up a lot. What's the difference between MAT and stretching? The difficult thing with MAT is that we address something that changes how your body's functioning, which is awesome. But we struggle to take our brain to think, wow, I need to get my muscles tuned up. That's why I'm feeling X, Y, and Z. Let me say that in a different way. When individuals come in feeling not flexible, or like a joint's not moving right, or they're having a lot of tightness or symptoms in a certain area, those are normally like red flags. When we hear those, a lot of us think, oh, I should stretch that. But what we see a lot of times with MAT is that these symptoms can be there as a side effect of muscles not doing a good job at doing their job. Meaning, as we achieve the main goal of muscle activation techniques, which is increase the ability for muscles to contract, these side effects start going away. And so what's interesting about this is that usually the issue that we're experiencing, whether it's tightness or lack of mobility, those things are not the problem. Those things are not the cause of the problem. They're not the problem. They are the symptom or the side effect of the problem. So MAT is difficult to explain to people sometimes because we're always thinking about what is the result. And the result of MAT is muscles contracting better. But we don't equate muscles contracting better with the change in the things that we're looking to change.
Yeah, this reminds me of an Instagram story and what I turned into an Instagram post and Facebook story that I did a couple weeks back. And what I talked about in that Instagram story was the thing that is so neat to me is the first time a client gets up off the table after their first MAT session and the look they have on their face of, wow, my body feels so much looser. Wow, it feels like I can move so much better. Wow, my back and my hips and my joints feel so much more stable and so much more supportive. Wow, it feels like I'm lighter. Wow, it feels like I'm taller. Wow, it feels like my whole body can move better. And just this look of first amazement and then kind of befuddlement where they're like, wait a second, but there wasn't any stretching involved. Wait a second, there wasn't any massage involved. Wait a second, there wasn't any kind of relaxing or releasing of tissues involved. How come my body feels so relaxed? How come everything feels so loose? And it's such an interesting thing to see time and time and time again. And it's so cool to see this because you see all these light bulbs go off and then this questioning of, wait, how come this is? How can this be? And to Julie's point, when you think about getting your muscles contracting better, you don't necessarily think, oh yeah, when I get my muscles contracting better, my body's going to feel so much looser. Or when I get my muscles contracting better, my joints are going to move so much better. Or I'm going to feel lighter. Or I'm going to feel taller. Or all these things that happen when your muscles contract better. But that's exactly what happens when your muscles start contracting better. Because when your muscles contract better, your joints get better supported, your joints can move better, and the muscles that were having to do too much work Now all of a sudden, the muscles that we may have been feeling as really tight before, they can start to relax. They don't have to do as much work because we have more muscles carrying the load of your body. We have more muscles sharing the workload of moving your body. And it's a really neat thing for clients to experience. It's really cool when they experience it for the first time, and then when they experience it time and time again, and they can get more and more muscles working better. It's just a really neat thing as a practitioner to see this, all day long, this happening with clients.
So what's interesting is that most of our clients come for the side effects. They don't come for the main effect. It's interesting because when we're doing muscle activation techniques, especially when a client's brand new, a lot of times clients will say, well, is it working? Like, did it work? And, if we're still working on you, that means it's working. Like, if you aren't responding correctly, that means you have something a lot more serious going on and you need to go see your doctor for that. But if it's working, meaning that we're able to restore muscle function in your body, then we keep working on you. And so it's interesting because clients will say, well, is it working? And because of the nature of MAT with the muscle testing is that we can find out if it's working pretty much right away. But because most clients come for the side effect of like, oh, I can move better. Oh, I'm more mobile. I'm more flexible. Oh, I don't get injured as much when I exercise. Oftentimes, we don't know if it's quote unquote working for the client, meaning the client deems it as it's helping them get to their goal until later, until they get up off the table, until they go do that activity that was bothering them before. Because MAT improves the contractility of muscles and not many people have a goal of having better contracting muscles, many clients don't see the results they're looking for until they go and do the activity because they're looking for the side effect of MAT. It's very hard to feel the effect of MAT or the main effect. But you have to see that because the side effects of MAT, which are all symptom-based usually, by the way, the real thing that's causing all this change is the main effect, is getting muscles to contract better.
So let's talk a little bit more about the differences, and we're going to talk about the differences in the process between stretching and the process of MAT. Now, with stretching, there are so many different options. I mean, when people say, oh yeah, I stretch all the time, or, should I be doing these stretches? The first question that always popped in my head is, well, what do you mean by stretching? Like, talk to me about what you mean by stretching, because there are so many different variations of stretching. There's so many different recommended frequencies and durations of stretching. So there's a lot of potential options when somebody says, I do stretching. It can be when you sit up out of bed and you kind of move your arms around, and that can be their stretch for the day. Or like Julie was saying, it can be a yoga class and the different joint motions and positions that are involved with that. Or it can be a very specific sensation-based thing, or it can be a partner can be required. So there's a whole bunch of different things that can go into the process of stretching. So it's really hard to comment on what the process of stretching is, but that is something that you kind of have to answer. You have to answer within yourself as far as, well, when you think of stretching, what do you think of? What comes to mind? How do you go about doing it? Now, with muscle activation techniques, it's different, and this is a trademarked process, so we can't actually talk about like the details and the specifics of the process. So we're not going to do that. But what you need to know is that with muscle activation techniques, it's one specific process, okay? And it should look the same whether, regardless of what practitioner you're going to see. So if it's a certified specialist that you find on the muscleactivation.com website, that process should be the same. Now, there are different levels of MAT. There's a jumpstart level, there's a specialist level, there's a master's level, and there's a RX level. And each of those levels has a different skill set. But it's a very similar, nearly identical process from one level to the next as far as what's going on with muscle activation techniques. But again, that's a trademark process, so that's not something that we can talk about in specific details on this podcast. But the goal is, from a compare-contrast standpoint, stretching, there's a whole bunch of different options. MAT, we're looking at one specific process.
Yeah, and the differences in the process with stretching really also highly influences the changes and results that people get from stretching. I mean, when clients come in and they're like, yeah, I have an achy back and, stretching seems to help, but sometimes it doesn't. And we're like, okay, well, how do you stretch? I mean, you said you stretch and sometimes it helps. Well, were you doing like PNF stretching? Were you holding it for like 5 minutes? Were you holding it for 20 seconds? Were you doing it 3 times a day or 3 times a week? Because of that variability, it's very hard to track and know what are the changes that people can and cannot get with stretching. The nice part about MAT, because it is a trademarked process and it should be very similar from practitioner to practitioner. It's easier to track the changes that we see. In addition, it's easier for you to see how you're progressing because it's the same every time. It's not with this huge variation like you can have with stretching.
And the other thing that comes along with the MAT process is a lot of times clients will be like, oh yeah, I saw this person and they do something like this. And it's like, well, if they're not doing this thing specifically, like if they have not been trained under Greg Roscoff's Muscle Activation Techniques educational system, then what they're doing is not this. And because the process is so specific, it's like if you deviate from that process, what ends up happening is the results just start to go downhill, meaning you get less and less and less positive results the more you deviate from this process. So it's very interesting because we hear that as well as like, oh yeah, I saw this therapist or this person or this doctor or whatever, and they do something like this. It's like, well, if they're not doing this, then that's a completely different thing. And so that's something that needs to be brought to light as well.
Yeah, we actually just shared a testimonial from one of our clients that brought that point up exactly. It was very interesting because so many times we go see different practitioners that might do muscle testing, and then a client might come in here and notice that we also do muscle testing, so they think it might be the same. But we use muscle testing in a very unique way. And it was interesting because in his testimonial quote, he said something like, I thought it was going to be like everything else that I tried that didn't work, but I was actually surprised once I did the session. And so that happens actually more often than you might think because there are similar components in MAT with other modalities. It can get confused, and especially we understand it can get confusing if you're not familiar with exercise or different body work techniques or different muscle testing techniques. It's confusing, just like it's confusing for Charlie and I when we step into another field, and there might be similarities in different modalities or techniques.
Now, the last thing we want to compare and contrast with MAT and stretching is the frequency of each. Okay, now let me ask you this. How many times have you heard somebody say, yeah, I stretch about once a month and I just have to stretch about once a month and I'm good. That's it.
Never.
The people who stretch, they're stretching how often?
Probably at least once a day, right?
At least once a day, if not multiple times a day. And if they miss a day, oh my gosh, they're tight, they're achy, all those symptoms are coming back. And so the frequency of stretching, it's variable, but what do people say? Well, I'm not stretching enough.
Always say that.
Oh, I don't stretch, but I know I should. Or, yeah, I stretch, but I know I need to do it more.
Yeah.
We hear that all the time. And that's fine and well, because that's what we're taught. That's what the media tells us. That's what, all our healthcare professionals tell us. Oh, you're feeling tight and achy, you need to stretch. Okay, cool. Fine and well. But it just highlights the point that the same thought that I used to have is that, well, hey, if 20 minutes of stretching after practice was good, well, then 45 must be way better. So the volume and the frequency is variable, and it's oftentimes very frequent, and it's rarely do you ever meet somebody that says, I only have to stretch about once a month and I'm good. That's it. No, it's something where it's done at least every single day, or if it's not, there's a guilty feeling associated with it.
That's right. Which, good news, contrasts largely with muscle activation techniques. Muscle activation techniques, most of our clients, and I think this is kind of common with most of our colleagues as well across the nation, is most people are coming in for, of course, like if you're coming in for, like you want to get something to change, you want to do more frequently in the beginning, which for us frequently is once a week or twice a week. And the goal really is to get you on maintenance. Like, let's get your muscles working well and let's keep them that way. And the keeping of the muscles working well versus getting them to work well is a different frequency. And often our clients will come in every other week and then switch to every third week and maybe to even once a month, depending on how active you are or how aggressive you are with your different activities. So it is person to person. But even our frequent visitors, which is once a week, maybe twice a week, that would be very infrequent relative to stretching. I mean, even if someone said, I stretch once a week, then most people would say, yeah, and I know I should be doing more. With muscle activation techniques, we see change that we can progress with when people are coming in once a week, which is really cool. So the frequency is so much lower. And I think this is also due to how potent MAT is. MAT is very potent and very specific. We're working on exactly what needs to be worked on. Versus stretching, a lot of times people will stretch everything, which makes it very general. In addition, stretching also is very not specific in terms of the doing of it, meaning a lot of times, you'll just reach for your leg and pull or reach your arm over and pull. And in MAT, if you've ever experienced it, every muscle test is very detail oriented because we want to be very specific with what we're doing. So that specificity helps not only you get better and faster results, but you don't have to do it as often, which is great.
Yeah, Julie, as you're talking, I'm thinking, how often have you and I gone to class and people say, how often do you get work done? And I'll be like, I get work done every week. Julie works on me every week. And they was like, oh my gosh, you are so lucky. You get work done every week. And believe me, I feel very fortunate that I get work done every single week. Julie and I put it in our schedules. We swap, we prioritize it, and it's huge. But if you were to go to somebody and say, well, how often do you stretch? And they go, I stretch once a week. Nobody would be like, oh, that's awesome. You must be doing great. They'd be like, you should probably be stretching more than that. But like hands down across the board, when you tell people, oh yeah, we get work done once a week, they're like, oh my gosh, that would just be life changing if I got work done once a week. And the reality is, a lot of times it is, in a way. It is completely changing like how your body feels, how your body functions at a once a week frequency. All right, what workout can you do once a week that completely changes how your body feels and functions? Okay, what thing can you do for 1 hour once a week that like completely changes how your body feels and functions? Mm-hmm. MAT is one of those things. Mm-hmm. And if you were to tell somebody, oh yeah, I stretch once a week and like that's all I need, that's pretty unheard of. But like if you get MAT once a week, oh my gosh, it's a complete game changer. Now, a lot of my clients come in every other week and they are doing fantastic. And I have a number of clients that only come in once a month. And what's so cool about that is I'll ask them, okay, how are you doing? And they'll be like, well, you know what? I'm a little bit tight, but that only started maybe like 3-4 days ago. So for like 3.5 weeks after their session, they were doing great. And then they come back in and, hey, it's time to get tuned up again. And then they're off doing whatever they want to do, like no restrictions because of physical ailments or anything like that. And we're able to progress them, from 1 month to the next. It's really cool. I don't know a single workout that I've ever done that I could go and do it once a month and maintain any level of strength or physical fitness, let alone progress. So that's one of the really cool things about muscle activation techniques is, to Julie's point, because it's so specific, the results are far more powerful.
Now, we're not having this conversation today to label one as good and one as bad, but to highlight differences. Because I think a lot of times when we're trying to address things in our body, we do want to label things as good or bad, or this is for me, or this is not for me. And instead, we want to highlight and talk about what things are, at least to our knowledge and to where we are today, at least. And so I hope that after this talk, you're better understanding what stretching is and what it can do for you and its limitations. In addition, I hope that, also you're able to see MAT in a different light in what it does and how it could potentially serve you. Now, one really cool thing in how they relate, and I know I felt this with me and Charlie and a lot of our clients, is that the more that people get MAT, the less that people need to stretch. And I think a lot of times, if you never, ever, 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 ever in your whole entire life ever felt a tight muscle, you probably would have never, ever, ever thought, I probably should stretch. But the thing is that our body has symptoms to tell us stuff. And one of those symptoms that's really common in our muscle tissue is to be tight. And because MAT, one of the side effects can be to alleviate that tightness because muscles are working better, we oftentimes find that people no longer have to stretch because that signal, that tightness signal, we're not feeling anymore. It's not a constant reminder to tell us that we should be stretching more and more and more. But often, if our tightness is caused by muscles not doing their job, and we get MAT to help muscles do their job better, well, then that tightness often goes away on its own, and it stays away on its own.
Yeah, I mean, to echo that comment, I haven't stretched myself personally. Like I used to stretch every single day, like I was saying. I haven't stretched in 8.5 years. And I haven't felt a need to stretch, at least nothing that once I go get, my weekly MAT session doesn't immediately go away. Mm-hmm. So to Julie's point, this idea of, needing to stretch all the time or anything like that, like seriously, when your muscles get working better, that feeling of always needing to stretch, always needing to foam roll, always needing to do things to try to relax or release muscles, that gets calmed way, 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 way down when your muscles get working better. And like we said, that is the number one goal. The only goal of muscle activation techniques is to assess and address muscles that are not working well. So who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know that stretches all the time, feels like they need to stretch all the time, or that is curious about what the difference between muscle activation techniques and stretching might be? Share this episode with them so they can hear our take on the subject. And while you're online, if you wouldn't mind, head on over to iTunes to leave us a rating and review. We always appreciate you taking the time to do that. We're trying to put out good quality content for you. And if you feel like we're doing that job, let us know. Leave us a rating and review. Take a screenshot of this and post it onto Instagram into your stories. Tag us, tag Julie Cates, tag Charlie Cates, tag Muscle Activation Schaumburg. We will make sure to reshare it, repost it. We always appreciate when people do that. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week.